Good evening, everyone. Before we start, and since this is a fellowship that talks about going to different lands, I want to pause and recognize that we are on the land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what we now know as Cambridge and Boston. So I want to take a moment to recognize the Massachusetts tribe, past, present, and future, and the special quality of this land. So this is the kind of evening that makes a dean really happy, because it's recognizing the generosity of one of our alumni and friends, Ron Druker. It's recognizing the achievements of two of our students. It's also the sort of payback moment for those two students to demonstrate what they did with this very generous fellowship that enables them to travel and see things around these topics that they'll be telling you about. So really, for me, this is a remarkable opportunity. It's an opportunity to thank Ron for his enabling this and for having this possibility within the school. I think it's also a great opportunity for students to hear what you can do with the Druker Fellowship, and so I look forward to that. My job is over. I get to now introduce the chair and Dunlop professor, Rahul Mehrotra. This is the fastest introduction I've ever pulled off. But thank you, Rahul. Rahul is the official host of this evening. I just wanted to steal the podium to thank Ron and to recognize the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ron, for being here. I'm Rahul Mehrotra. I'm the chair of the department, an alum who graduated in 1987 when the first fellowship was awarded. The fellowship was established in 1986 by Ron Druker, who is a Loeb Fellow from '76, and also the trustees of the Bertram Druker Charitable Foundation. And we are always thrilled and happy, as we are today, Ron, because you really are engaged with this fellowship. You've been here for all these presentations, meet the fellows, and we really appreciate that, and the students do. The Druker Traveling Fellowship is open to all students of the GSD who demonstrate excellence in the design of urban environments. The fellowship offers students the opportunity to travel in the United States or abroad to pursue study that advances the understanding of urban design. That's sort of the intent. It's awarded annually, the Druker Prize, which enables a comprehensive research-based travel throughout the world. And this endowed fellowship is, to quote from its terms, is made with the intention of creating urban environments that are practical and imaginative responses to the broad spectrum of physical, political, financial, and aesthetic concerns of society. And this award really deepens the experience, so that's the intention of the recipients, in terms of their design education, and expects them to really make an important contribution to the global discourse in design-based research. Not to put pressure on the two of you for today, but that's the intent. And the recipients, leaders in the design of urban environments, are expected to really share their experiences with the GSD community through the lecture or this presentation that has also been a tradition. We had a bit of a gap because of the pandemic, and so that's why we are making up. We have 4 that have to present, and so we are doing 2 today in a slightly altered format, which we hope we will keep going with, because there's something nice about doing this in the evening, having a panel discussion and engaging the GSD more broadly. This is being live streamed within the GSD, so there are a number of people also watching this at their desks or at home. For the GSD to really have had a member of its family, an individual like Ronald Druker, who was also a member of the faculty, by the way, from 78 to 83, and who had the foresight to understand the world, that the world was changing, and the generosity to create this very special endowed fellowship. Ron obviously realized that education in the classroom had to be complemented with on-site experience through travel. And this has really been a contribution to the texture of the education at the GST. The fellowship really is a fantastic format, a sort of complementary learning, because it allows for expansive research at a global scale, allowing for comparative research across nations and continents. And this is something I'm sure we're going to hear more about through their experiences. In fact, in many ways, the fellowship what it's done is create ambassadors, or probes perhaps, that sense the changing world around us and come back to the GST to report from the frontiers on the samples they've discerned. And this feedback loop, and at least for me personally, these presentations are really important and exciting, are ways of sort of kind of really reading the world through the lens of fresh graduates concerned with a set of issues that they come back and report on. And I think one of the things we were talking about this earlier, we've had conversations, is how now to really, in the 30-plus years this fellowship has been around, to really archive this more deliberately in ways that it can contribute to teaching material, but also an archive at the GST. And the fellows are doing that. Some of them really put together substantial books, but everyone gives us something that we can archive, and how we might formalize this is a question, I think, for all of us. In fact, really, the Travel Fellowship is perhaps the first international focused travel fellowship dedicated to promote urban design, and really has, I think, been very important for both the school, but I think for the graduates particularly, because urban design, being a practice, as we say, more than a discipline, relies on instruments such as this to build its research base, and it's important for us to use this resource more strategically, and that's why I think we need to collectively, and in discussion with Ron and Sarah and the library, see how we can use this resource in a way that we can build an archive. And I think that really is the natural evolution of this fellowship. In 1986, when the fellowship was founded, the notion of the globalized world was still emerging. Travel was not easy. Many parts of Asia not so accessible. India, China, Korea, Taiwan were all waking up, so to speak, to be part of this larger global economy. So the travels of our first few recipients was about discovery, really in the true sense. Itineraries were broad. There was no internet or cell phones that could comfort you on your journey. In fact, the library was perhaps the only source of your research till you hit the ground. And we will hear today from two of the Druker Fellows, and each will acknowledge the transformative nature that the Druker Fellowship has sort of provided them. So Ron, your investment in the training of our design students and your belief that creating an opportunity for further study and experience can extend the research of urban design is deeply applauded. Thank you. Your commitment to our students at this early stage of their urban design careers bring depth to the education at the GST and to the Department of Urban Planning and Design specifically. The GST is fortunate to have you as one of our long-standing supporters. Thank you very much. And I'm going to invite you to say a few words, but before that, I'd like to very quickly introduce our speakers. So right after that, you guys can go on and present, and then our Professor Joan Busquets will moderate the discussion after the presentation and then close the event. Our first speaker is going to be Botis, who is a graduate in 2017, MAUD. He's an architect and urban designer, holds a diploma in architecture engineering from the University of Patras in Greece, and a Master of Architecture here at the GST. As I said, 2017 was when he was awarded this fellowship for research on logistic operations and urbanism on a global scale, and he traveled in different areas of the world to document the coexistence of these operations with the contemporary city and the kinds of synergies they connect. And he has worked in practice, collaborated in places like Athens, Brussels, Boston, where he's been working on competitions, private projects, and has a practice going which he enjoys very much. It was hard to get him to focus on this once he had been out in the real world. And our second presenter, Maxime Faure, is a graduate in 2018. He's an urban designer architect based in Paris. He grew up in the south of France, has been trained between his home country and the US, and holds a master's of architecture and urban design from here, the GSD, and his undergraduate studies were in Paris, both where he received honors. His path led him to work across, again, scales and geographies after his training as an urban designer in both professional and academic realms, working at several renowned international practices. Maxime has had the opportunity to be part of teams designing high-profile hospitality, mixed-use urban design projects in Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and North America. And he has sought to really strive to develop a kind of multidisciplinary and multi-scalar approach with work ranging from furniture to research-based design projects. And for his own work on the Druker Fellowship, he decided to examine education and the making of urban designers. So really look forward to these two presentations and the discussion, Joanne, that will follow after this. And with that, I'm going to request you, Ron, to say a few words, and then we'll move to the presentations. Thank you all.
I will be really brief. I've said this at the lunches, but it's really a thrill for me to be here after having made the commitment to make the donation to the school in '86 with Dean McHugh. I know all the fellows, and I've met them all. I had a tradition of having a sushi dinner right around the corner from my office in the financial district, and that restaurant ceased to exist. So we used to have lunch at the Harvard Club and other places, and that's sort of kind of fallen by the wayside. And actually, I used to show up at graduation to greet the fellow who was announced at graduation in the back of the school. So, look, I don't know what the value of the fellowship is today in terms of what Harvard management has done, but that little acorn has grown into a big tree. And it's provided the students with the opportunity to travel extensively and to travel pretty well compared to the way the fellowship started. And certainly things have become more expensive. But for me, every project that we've done bears the influence of some of my travel. And there might be at the Heritage in the Garden, there's a night bell that I saw in London. And there's a curve in another building from a photograph that I saw in Paris. Architects' worst nightmare. They don't want to see me travel because they know that when I come back, I'm really going to be a pain. But the fact that the M&M boys here, as I dubbed them when we were chatting out in the gallery, are here is terrific. And this was kind of my hope that when we created the fellowship, that it would be a presentation available to the whole school. I get the GSD. I was here for 8 years in the faculty. I've been associated with the school since April of 1945, in 1975, and not that long. So the hot dogs and beer started when I was here. I had nothing to do with it. I was a recipient. I was a beneficiary. But the fact is that I know this place, and I'm really happy to be here. Tonight will be a great night. I'm glad that you all are here, and I hope you learned something. And thank you, and Rahul, thank you so much, and Dean Sarah, thank you very much as well. So, as they say, break a leg.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be back at the GSD for the presentation of the Druker Fellowship that I received in 2017. And it has been really a fantastic experience so far. And for that, of course, from my side, I would like to thank Mr. Druker and the GSD. And I would also like to thank them for the persistence to really do this event in person and not in Zoom, as it would happen probably last year. I'm going to start my presentation. Okay. Elements of logistics, flows and space in the post-industrial city. Elements because the field of logistics is, as you might know, is very broad, extending to more than one discipline. So in this presentation, we'll only be looking on certain parts of logistics that are related to urban design and planning. Flows and space because by definition, logistics have to do with the unobstructed flow of goods, but at the same time, they create and they change the space around us. And post-industrial because we want to define the period we will be talking about, the cities, the space, the infrastructure of the last 50 years, that is defined by the transition from the industrial to the post-industrial city, and that laid the ground for the development of logistics. This is a photo of the Aquarium of Paris back in 1900 by Henri and Albert Guillaume, where we can see that the people are enjoying the aquarium. That is what people see, but they are completely unaware of all the complicated mechanisms on their background. And it kind of reminds me of the time I selected this topic back in 2017 when I proposed the topic of logistics for my research, because I was inspired, but at the same time impressed from the phenomenon that I could understand that there is an extensive mechanism of people, infrastructure, and systems that operate on background of an Amazon order, but then I couldn't understand where all these mechanisms live, who is dealing with them, and what kind of footprint and impact they have. So we place the time frame of the research on the last 50 years, and as Claire Leister mentions in this abstract, we can't keep reading the city through the traditional architectural lens, but we have to start looking on the operations that happen on the foreground or the background, and give our cities a more fluid conditions. So today, the cities are dynamic systems related to technological and economical networks, infrastructural projects, consumption habits, and global connections. The fluid condition of the cities and its operational processes are diverse in scale and in type. We can include, of course, the big infrastructural projects, but what is also included are the buildings that accommodate these functions, big in footprint, diverse in technology, and relatively new as typologies. Although the systems are new, the notion of logistics is not new at all. It exists for thousands of years, and its basis is back on the military operations of storing, moving around, and even producing objects, and has today only a common parameter with its military past, and this is the idea of efficiency. So the military background of the world comes to the present not only with the effort for efficiency, but often with a formal expression too. For example, we can look at the form of a military fortification for a city on the left, described by Albrecht Dürer during the 14th century. And on the right, we can look and compare with a typical organization of an Amazon warehouse. A few years ago, Professors Waldheim and Berger placed the logistic landscape, meaning the landscape that has been shaped from the presence of all the components necessary for the shipment, storage, and delivery of goods, among the most significant transformations of the built environment during the last 50 years. They relate this morphological change on the accommodation of global supply chains, meaning operations that extend beyond the local or even national and are part of a global network. And as we will see on the following slides of the presentation, the idea of the global chain makes the location of the logistics sometimes irrelevant, in the sense that the space that is important for the logistic operations can be a space completely unexpected for the common sense. Unfortunately, only very few things have been written for the field of logistics from the perspective of our discipline. So most of the literature is about the business, transportation, or production side. And my intention was to find these elements within the broader field that might be interesting for the relationship with our fields. And the three elements that I decided to present to you today are, number one, free trade zones as clusters of exclusivity that more and more often we come across in different forms. On the basis of global trading and economic development, these zones are subject to their own rules of planning, law, labor, and differentiate themselves from the hosting surroundings. Number two, infrastructure as the most important component of the logistics network and one of the basic tools of globalization and capitalism. And number three, the direct relationship of logistics and city and the question of how people live close by logistic operations. I will present 4 case studies to cover the 3 chapters. My case studies are not necessarily comparable one to the other. They are different aspects of a broad field and only cover certain ideas within this field that I find that they have something to say for the future of urban design and planning. Although at the end it was never my intention to present comparable examples, at the end I kind of realized that many of them sort of are connected, like in a way. Of course, the first 2 cases relate more to the general idea about the policy side of logistics, and the second ones have a more tangible aspect and how they affect the people around them. So every case study can be thought under a more general concept, and in the case of free trade zones, this concept is described by the word enclave. Enclaves describe the concentration of a group with similar characteristics within an area that most of the times operates under its own rules and characteristics. This is also the concept of the free trade zones, areas with their own characteristics defined by specific borders that are designed to accommodate primarily activities related to trade, with different labor and tax regulations from their hosting area, and many times with additional facilities to support their function, like residential or commercial areas. More and more free trade zones are designed and built around the world, growing along with the rapid evolution and intensification of logistic operations. As they occupy a larger and larger footprint, incorporating more and more urban programs and function under their own rules and control, we as designers and planners should question their presence and what type of urban conditions can we expect on a space like this, where design guidelines are often imposed by the zone's expectations. Looking across the world, free trade zones can have many similarities but also a lot of differences. Most of the times they have strictly defined boundaries and a very controlled and secure operational environment. On the other hand, the effort for creative urbanism within the zone is not always a standard condition. The following case study will examine the establishment of Shenzhen's free trade zone in 1978 as an example of urban experimentation that produced a series of urban design projects and offered remarkable conditions for housing, public space, and working environment within the context of zone exceptionality. Considering the fact that this zone was the beginning for a new socioeconomic era for modern China, make this effort even more interesting and remarkable. The zone is not something new, but has seen significant change on its presence in the last 50 years. It was during the 70s that the UN claimed that the free trade zones can be powerful tools for development across multiple areas of the globe. And looking at the statistics from the book of Keller Easterling, we understand that the zone is becoming a common tool around the world for economic development and job opportunities, and we can also assume that its presence and footprint affect the social, economic, but also spatial life of the areas where they exist. The challenges for Shenzhen Free Trade Zone were a lot, and they were very clear at the beginning. A defined, well-secured and independent zone had to be established with the sole purpose of transforming China from a closed agricultural economy to a market-oriented one. At the same time, socialist ideology had to be controlled and detached from the rejected Western capitalistic model. How the economy could be in connection with the West, but the rest of the country not. And how could this spill out not affect the people of the country? The solution came from planning or more specifically, the lack of planning. A defined border with controlled access would define a zone for market activities, and it would be up to the enterprises in the zone to develop each one an area. A place to work, a place to live, public and commercial spaces was left to the individual beliefs of each enterprise, with a sounding absence of central planning and state intervention during the first years. So we can identify 3 periods that define the last 50 years in Shenzhen. The first one is the period before Mao's death, where China is a closed country and a closed economy. Shenzhen is a vast rural land with small villages, and the economy is based on agricultural production, and there is a strong central government with low power and small collectives. The second period starts after Mao's death, when a decision is made to establish the first free trade zone in Shenzhen. A defined zone is created on the border with Hong Kong to filter the impact of Western economy on the social society of China. This new border line in the country is now called the second fence. This zone is divided into independent development areas, and each one is given to a state-owned enterprise that has the freedom to develop it. That results to a weak central planning administration, but to a strong autonomy for each enterprise to manage and develop large pieces of land. State-owned enterprises in China are wholly or partly controlled by the state, but in reality they are quite independent and operate freely as the independent corporate phase of the state. The last period, that starts at least 10 years after the establishment of the zone, comes with further reforms, but also with the central government retaining part of the planning autonomy from the enterprises and establishing a strong municipal government in the zone. The following case study, we look at this middle period as an urban experiment, a city created in tabula rasa. Logistics and light industry were the main programs, but along with them, interesting residential and public programs expressed the sensitivities and expectations of each developer. Indeed, the establishment of the zone was an opportunity for the area. The rise of population and GDP on the first years of its existence is impressive. As people relocate in the zone where companies for light industry, trade, and logistics were very active. This accumulation of money and labor offered to the companies the opportunity to create projects that express not only their own very personal ideas and beliefs, but also a general vision for the society they want to create within the cluster. Looking at the map of the area, we see a long piece of land bordering Hong Kong to the south and mainland China to the north. That line was called the second fence and controlled the influence of the market economy to the rest of the country. Through 14 control points, it allowed the access only to certain parts of the population, creating a different situation of income, infrastructure, and social class to the one side and to the other. The zone, as it happens with most of the zones until today, had a strong security perimeter with fencing and police presence. By default, the zone excludes itself from the surrounding context. Within the zone, the local government was a temporary agency with no budget and not much authority. Nevertheless, it allocated pieces of land for industrial and logistic operations. Scattered pieces of construction appear, and many companies invite planners from other countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, or Malaysia to consult and assist the design process. Given the situation, the incoming enterprises have the full authority over their areas, not only for the planning and design of the land, but even to experiment with political and socio-economical systems. As a result, the early years of the zone are characterized not only by industrial and logistic areas, but also by great efforts for city-making projects. In his book, Great Leap Forward, Rem Koolhaas describes that effort as a set of incomparable market experiments put together as stitches. Koolhaas found the unpredictability and dynamic character of this real estate experiment, especially within a socialist environment, a source of freedom. Indeed, during this period, the enterprises devoted themselves on city making. They tested solutions and promoted equality of access to urban resources and facilities. The assigned pieces of land were quite different from the area of South Petrov, for example, on the top left, with an area of 24 kilometers to the smallest part of the lower right that did not exceed 0.5 square kilometers of area. Some of them, mostly the smaller ones, were monofunctional for light industry, warehousing, and logistics. The larger ones include additionally other functions and were much more open to test different designs. It might be interesting to briefly see more in detail 3 examples of urban design and understand not only the design parameter, but also the social background and what was the intuition and the vision for each one. For example, the area of Seku was one of the largest assigned pieces. A Hong Kong-based shipping company was responsible for developing the site. Besides an extended area of warehousing that supported its role as trading core, the area was fully independent in energy, public health, education, and planning. With the dream of a fully democratic society, all the residents participated in decision-making for public space. Numerous apartments and dormitories were built for the employees of the company, and massive landscape projects of hill leveling or reclaiming land in the sea were executed for additional green space. This is one project within the Seku area for the employees of the TV factory that was about creating a democratic pedestrian public space articulated in 3 blocks. On this second case, the Science and Technology Park aimed to become a Chinese Silicon Valley, including programs of light industry and warehousing, together with research on technology and affordable housing. Although the intentions were good, the project almost failed, as the management was bad and the company had other priorities, resulting to great disappointment. And here, with the form of the campus, the Science and Technology Park. Smaller areas were many times less equal to the larger ones. For this small logistic zone, no money was found from investment. So, nevertheless, the landlords managed to build and sell most of the buildings, creating a flexible system with a simple grid, where independent buildings of logistics and housing were placed. And this is the design of the area with programs of logistic, production, housing, commercial uses. And these were not the only interesting projects. We just saw the 3 projects on the second row, but there were also important projects looking to attract investment by introducing new programs besides the typical ones, where other projects incorporated research, touristic resorts, and large shopping areas, or simply advanced infrastructure for trading. And these are some photos to visualize the type and quality of projects we saw in the previous slides, but also the diversity, flexibility, and freedom that the system of developing the zone was offering. So efficiency is the most important characteristic of logistics. Efficiency is improved when informed by new technologies, research, and interaction with other fields. With this as a concept, free trade zones slowly become more than production, storage, and trade. As Keller Easterling mentions, they open up to absorb more and more programs and create exclusive clusters that can be easily replicated with similar forms around completely diverse places. Taking new forms and new names through time, the zones are a transformable urban project that rediscovers itself every few years, living next to the cities with its own rules, extending its footprint by incorporating new areas and new infrastructure. As a matter of fact, these are only 4 of the many examples we can identify for the evolution of the free trade zones. They can be clusters within a city, a city by themselves, or patches of exclusivity within an area of, or just shared between countries, as it happens in China. Of course, we cannot discuss about logistics without identifying their role as a network of nodes and connections. And connections means infrastructure. In the following case study, we'll see how the expanding footprint of logistics requires not only new infrastructure, but the creation of new cities on support of this infrastructure. Traditionally, the city would take advantage of its position by creating the infrastructure that would connect it with other places. The city would come first and the infrastructure later. On a time where global connections and efficient transportation of goods have become so important, many new infrastructures bring together simultaneously in the new city. So we will be looking at the port of Yangshan on the south of Shanghai, China, and the Lingang new city that was designed to support the port and its warehousing and logistics zone. Almost 30 years ago, David Harvey proposed that the conception we have of space and time is shifting along with the technological improvements, the capitalistic production, and the economic development. Among many other things that affect these fields, infrastructure is one of the most prominent, as it is using all of them to operate on a global scale. New definitions like airport city, where the airport becomes the epicenter attracting the city around it, or port cities, where the port lays the ground to simultaneously develop a new city, have been the new normal for the last decades. For one of these cases, I will be talking on the following slides. On the left, we see the complex of islands during the 1980s that eventually transformed to a continuous piece of land to create the Yangshan port, on one of the largest of its type in China, responsible for import and export of commercial goods. The port itself extends to a few kilometers of length in the middle of the sea, but the port is not a single object detached from everything. A bridge connects it to the mainland, where the new city was designed to support its operations. This new city was designed to provide space for 800,000 people and was expected to be finished by 2020, although this definitely hasn't happened. The necessity to build a city at this exact area and in close proximity to the port required a large part of it to be built on reclaimed land. And you can see on the video the edge of the land and how the shoreline changed the last 30 years for the creation of the city. Nevertheless, the master plan includes extended areas of warehousing and logistics on an effort for the city to become a global logistics hub. Most of the parts of the perimeter of the city are devoted to these operations. And by the time I visited the site, the port and the logistics zones of the city were fully functional, but what was not functional was the city itself. At that time, mostly a ghost city, it hadn't managed to attract the people or any kind of urban life. Lingang New Cities is only an example on a much larger frame of new cities and new infrastructures. The necessity for policy projects that will encourage and promote the global logistic operations is on the rise the last decades, with controversial opinions. From the IIRSA in South America and other policy projects for commercial corridors around the world, the most prominent is probably the Belt and Road Initiative, designed and executed from the Chinese government for the unobstructed export of its production surplus. Consisting of two main paths, one in the sea and one in the land, it's expected to affect a large part of the world. Planned new cities will be created as a result of the new infrastructural projects. Remote places will become now visible on the map as places of economic development. The power of infrastructure as a result of the demand on logistics generates new cities and redefines the traditional advantages of location, reorganizing parts of the global map. So, on the previous case studies, we saw the ideas about logistics and examples that are more on the sphere of policy and planning. We saw examples of specific concepts like the free trade zone, but also examples that go beyond the place and refer to the way the global dots are connected and their power to create space. On the following case studies, I would like to talk more about tangible everyday interactions, places where people live and understand the impact that logistic operations have in their lives, and how planning becomes a tool for solutions or maybe disappointment. And eventually see examples of how we live with these operating systems as they grow bigger and bigger. Oops. Yeah. We will look now on a case where the operations of logistics appear to have a more tangible impact on the lives of people as places of conflict within the city itself. We will look at the case of Ontario in California, where logistics arrived with a promise of development for the local society, but as it is understood, there is never such a simple concept. In the case of Ontario, logistics not only transform the area, but slowly occupy more and more space, getting on war with the local people. Ontario is found in the wider Los Angeles area, 37 miles from the downtown Los Angeles and not far from the port of Long Beach. The location of the city is important as it will explain how the position of a place and its local politics can relate significantly to its transformation as a logistics hub. The area was famous for its local orange and citrus groves, occupying for decades large pieces of the periphery of the city and becoming the main source of income for the local community. As a result of its extended areas of trees and its good climate, the city was also known as a health center, an area where people could buy a house to invest on its healthy air and living conditions. The character of the area as a large center of production and agriculture was further encouraged with the arrival of the highway system, that made the city more accessible for visitors that wanted to invest or buy in the area, but also as a way for the locals to export large amounts of products. That happened continuously for many decades until the early 70s and 80s, when initially the business park and later its evolution as warehousing and logistics came to slowly replace the groves. Today, on the place where the groves used to exist, a continuous carpet of warehouses is occupying the area. As the importance of the site for logistic operation was growing, more and more companies came to the area to find a place for their facilities. Not many things are left to remind the past of the city and its agricultural production or its character as a health resort. To understand the reasons for this transformation, we have to zoom out and look on the regional and global conditions. The reasons are starting from a global scale and go down to the local parameters of the place. We can identify three main reasons that led to the transformation of Ontario. The first one has to do with the global trading and consumption opportunities. The second one with practical issues of storage, space, and the need for expansion of the port of Los Angeles. And the last reason was the land and labor cost in the hinterland. More specifically, the last 40 years, consumption habits of people in the United States have changed, and the same has happened with the imports. The opening of China to the Western markets has resulted in a continuous flow of goods through the Pacific Ocean, and Los Angeles was the port where most of the goods would arrive. Greater LA area became the first stop before millions of objects would spread to the rest of the country. Another reason was that these goods had to be stored somewhere for some time before moving to other places of the country. The storage area of the port ran out of space, and the possibilities for expansion were very limited. As a result, new areas that could easily connect with the port were necessary. Places outside the city offered much larger areas of storage, but the infrastructure to transfer the goods to these places had to be constructed. In LA, a sunken rail line for cargo transport called Alameda Corridor was one of the biggest and most expensive infrastructural projects, with the main part constructed between the Long Beach port and downtown Los Angeles, and its expansion to Ontario that is expected to finish soon. And last but not least, the space needed for storage could be found in unlimited quantities, but also in low prices in the suburban areas of the hinterland. So the cost of the land, but equally important, the cost of labor, was much lower in places like Ontario. Ontario, on the other side, found an opportunity to attract job positions in massive quantities, but with controversial results as the quality of the offered jobs and the salaries were considered poor. The city took over the role as a ground for logistic operations, and the transformation of the city the last 35 years has been dramatic. The footprint of the warehouse occupies now the largest part of the city and extends to all directions. Sooner or later, this change would bring issues to the area. This is a video I got when I went there with a drone. Okay, I probably have to speed up a bit. So if you walk around and observe the city, there are a few conclusions that immediately become visible. In terms of the urban condition, the most important are, first, the footprint and the space these facilities occupy. Large part of the city is occupied from warehouses over hundreds of thousands square feet. The second one is the dramatic condition of enclosure, whole clusters of housing that are surrounded from every side by warehouses. Third one is the border condition, and when sometimes one road is the only border between the two scales. Fourth one is the street setback. All the warehouses require setbacks from the street. And that takes us to the fifth one, that is an unlimited amount of parking lots and unoccupied areas between the buildings for parking the trucks. And finally, the last one is the issue of scale, where not only we see a strong border between the programs, but the buildings are defined, and the area is defined by completely unrelated scales. For example, in this case, the enclosure, we can see on the map how a small neighborhood in the middle is completely surrounded by the warehouses. On this second snapshot, the strong border and the issue of scale. Finally, the large areas of parking and setbacks that create an unfriendly condition for pedestrians, of course. The biggest problem, of course, has to do with the uncontrolled expansion of the warehouse facilities. People that invested money on buying property in the area, expecting to live in a different context, are now facing a situation where the land around their homes is becoming ground for warehouses. Many articles have been written for this problem. I will just go very briefly through this one of Los Angeles Times. How millions of square feet of these buildings are built, but also how people are selling their house to build new warehouses. How the benefits of the presence of logistics on the area, of course, cannot be ignored, but also the changes on people's life cannot be ignored either. And how at the end the planning didn't really become a tool for solving problems, but rather a tool used primarily for political benefits, leaving many people helpless. And last but not least, we have to address the most important problem that is very obvious in Ontario. How many logistics operations are worth the environmental issues that come along, and how can we make sure that these operations will not affect people's health? I really have to run for the the last case study, so if I can have 2 minutes to go through. So finally, the last case studies we will talk about is mutation that happens when logistics exist around the community for a long time, and they evolve and change and work together with the community. So we'll be talking about the area of Westland in the Netherlands that has emerged as a global center for food production, and how the intensification of operations during the last years has activated also the planning discipline to redesign a more balanced future between both for the business and the people living there. And as with the previous case study that we saw, the proximity, footprint, and function of these facilities comes with some kind of conflict with the nearby urban centers. A very extended article in National Geographic a few years back described how this tiny part of a tiny country has actually managed to be among the top countries on the race for food production. Westland. Westland is in the Netherlands between two major cities, with The Hague on the north. I'm going to use this one. This is The Hague. Rotterdam is down here, and the port of Rotterdam, so it's this area in between. The area itself has smaller or larger urban centers that have been formed the last few decades. And what has also happened during the last 30, 40 years is that a very big part of the area has been covered with production units that have mobilized the local economy to achieve high standards of production and trading. Today, the situation in the area is a dense mix of facilities working 24/7 right next to the cities. During the last decades, the logistic operations have been intensified, and it would be certain that that would lead up to some kind of conflict. And indeed, this conflict is not a result of their existence, but a result of how their operations have changed the last decades. Looking first at how these urban centers have developed the last decades, we will see that the area started from small areas to gradually become organized urban centers. These areas continue to grow, but in the recent years, this expansion reached to a point where it was blocked due to the lack of space, and the areas in between were now occupied by the production units. This is a video that goes quite slow, actually. So these are the new buildings added to the area per period during the last 80 years. And we see how we went from this scale to the first traces of larger facilities, and then to almost a completely new development of big facilities that continued until at some point it was blocked. So different parts work together to recognize the challenges and the possible solutions. Production and housing had to find a way to coexist within limited space. because both were, of course, necessary. Planning was the main tool that was used to find the new possibilities for this area, and also additionally to planning, technology, also the very advanced technology with whom these facilities work has offered also types of organizing space much more efficiently. I'm not gonna go through anyway, the local community proposed different types of organizing the master plan from now on with 4 main chapters. Very briefly, this is one chapter. This is a focus on the logistic operations. This one is focused on the research, and there are 2 more, of course. I will not go in the details of these ones. So, in conclusion, I have tried through this research to look at the results of this transformative period of logistics, the last 50 years, and the implications they come with. I have tried to identify different elements of the field that relate to politics and policy, urban design and economics, and how all these things blend together to affect people's lives in our cities. Although the role and importance of logistics can by no means be underestimated, we have to also identify the things that have a margin for improvement, and especially those where urban design and planning can be leaders on this process of improvement. So far, planning hasn't managed to avoid or mitigate the obvious problem of these operations clearly, and that despite their large footprint and required resources, they are still in war with their context, and most importantly, that these areas are cities within the cities, but without people. Due to their character, these areas are places that don't relate with their context that much, as with other sites on the other parts of the world. And this division of local and global is fundamental for the logistic operations, as they are meant to be driven by the hand of globalization. And of course, on the light of the latest global geopolitical changes, we can probably also question again the dominant ideology of globalization, and I believe it's an opportunity to rethink the ways we live and engage with these systems. And last but not least, there's space to reflect on our stance as consumers, as we at the end are the people that these operations seek to satisfy. And more than anything else, these operations are heavy, with a cost for the environment and with required resources that are completely opposite to the spirit of sustainability that we should all be looking for. Thank you. So, Maxime.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Maxime. It's great to be here actually. I would like to thank you also, Ron, for letting us travel around the world like this, and also like all the faculty that has been involved in this research, because there are quite a few, and also like all of the support system I had like throughout the since graduation actually in 2018. So today I would like to present my subject, which was actually originally titled 1960-2020, the making of a practice that actually changed today, because it was originally actually looking at taking the opportunity of the 60th anniversary of the creation of the urban design program at the school at the GSE in 1960 to actually like take this anniversary to step back and look back at what's been done, like how the practice has been evolving, like how the school has actually like shaped it, and to have basically to understand through this fellowship like how urban design from the school has been exported like around the world. So this research actually, like this presentation today, is really divided into 3 parts, where we're going to discuss the travel itself. Then we'll go to how the urban design program was shaped at the GSD, and after like gather like some thoughts and questions that I had throughout the trips. So, but just like to step back, actually, like there is like some clues that we can get from the actual title of the fellowship, the Druker Traveling Fellowship, and the first thing is maybe, sorry. Like the first thing was maybe to go back to the ambition of Ron when he set out the fellowship, was to have people like us, like students, interested into urban questions, to actually like go outside and question the city. And I could actually see on my side like this fellowship as an opportunity to grow my education on that, and to see that what I've seen in school was not all of what I could see, all of the faces that urban design can actually take. So thank you for that. There is also like this idea of traveling, of course, and if we look back also at the cohort of people that actually created the urban design program at the GSD back in the 50s and on, we can see that it's an international crowd that necessarily like travel and an international breadth is actually rooted into urban design itself. And then there is this idea, of course, of a fellowship, of building up a lineage of people that have actually like thought about different subjects that they've been interested in, and that we could see that for the past 30 years there is some kind of subject to actually like grasp what urban design is about throughout the years. So with that in mind, like I will step into the first part of the presentation, which is about the travel itself, and also like going back to this idea of urban design as an international practice. It goes back to this idea of case studies, of going abroad to actually like look at different cities, and this is what we could see actually like looking at archives that's been done like from the beginning. So this is what I try to do for the travel at my scale. So in order to do that, to look at urban design and to see its evolution throughout time, I could actually spend three main trips, 1 month each, that were actually like spread between like 2018 and 2020, which had like two ambitions. Like the first one was to actually go abroad and visit some projects, see like what is the production that the school has has been building actually, and also like meeting with the different people that actually were either involved in those projects or that happened to be in those geographies at that time. So the ambition for me was to look at urban design through those two lenses, like the actual built work and what people are talking about, and to go back on the question of travel. Actually, essentially, I think what was something which was like really interesting to me is to say that looking at the city, looking at the built environment, and looking at urban design can actually like lead you in such diverse geographies and context. And thanks again like for the travel. It's not something that we necessarily see like from books, like directly looking at the case studies, but like on one day we could be like in Rwanda to go visit like some of the project of mass design, and 2 days later go in Singapore. And this was part of the first trip that I did, that to me was the most mind-blowing in a way, to address such changes. There is also like another aspect that to me was really important with this idea of travel, is that before like while submitting the proposal, I had like some project that I wanted to see, but what I didn't realize is that to go from one project to another, you actually have the way in between, which is going to actually like tell you a lot of information, because you actually can see how people live, where people go, like how is the public spaces used? Is it the same public space that I would use where I come from? How is it different? And this really question also like the project that we could actually go and visit to understand like how is it relevant? How does it answer like this specific context? Another aspect which was great about traveling is that also like as I was going to visit places, visit people, I would also like see the different offices in which the architect architecture and the design was actually like built. And also here we see like some overlaps between like the different offices. Another aspect, and it goes back also about, again, this idea of traveling to me and to meet like people that are really dear to me, that actually I could really understand also like the influence that the GSD has across the different geographies, because like in almost like every places that I've been to in the 3 continents, it was, I could always like meet some people like from the GSD, and to me it helped me realize that there is this community which exists across the different places, which is actually like spreading the world of the GSD and revealing its influence. And this influence, I could see it like from the different people I visited, but also with very scattered clues that happen like across those places. So what you see here, you have like a poster of the lecture in 2017 that was in Singapore. You have like the Carpenter Center that must be, like there is no way it's not like a reference that comes from someone from the GSD. This was in Rwanda. And the last thing, and to me it's kind of funny, is the fact that I've seen this section of Gun Hall, where we have like the whole exhibition just outside today, which was actually at GSAP. So it seems like the GSD is everywhere, and it was actually great to see that while traveling. And with this slide, I can make this transition to actually like look at how the GSD has shaped back in the days the program of urban design. And so this part of the presentation will be more into like the first trip, which happened like actually like in the library before leaving Boston after graduation, where I could actually like dig into the different documents that testified about like how urban design been shaped. And the first thing to know is actually urban design. So it's the first program, of course, in the US. That was created, and actually we can see that the GSD was actually like originally a fertile ground for that, because it's also like one of the very first places where you're going to have landscape architecture and planning in the same place. So it's kind of a continuation of that. And so going into those different documents, like it seemed that urban design was shaped early on by different mediums. Like the first one was a seminar, and this is like a manuscript actually like from CERT, which is actually like giving us like some information about where it sits, like what could be the extent of urban design. And the first thing that comes here in this list is like the physical environment, the idea of a man-made landscape, and this idea that in the end, like wherever we have built environment, we can consider it to be within the realm of urban design, and that we can question actually like how people live. There is also like this idea of the shape of our communities, so having like some kind of a social aspect to it, but still related to shape, to form, to how is the city, how is the built environment formed. Then like one other aspect is actually like the architect and the city. And to me, what's interesting here is to say that during the 50s, like there was this ambition to actually expand the role of the architect and to make it more aware, to have like a more holistic approach, which would be like enhancing like more knowledge as well. The fourth aspect that is brought up by CERT in this document, to me, is the one which is like the most outdated, but which is still important, like this idea of 4 basic function of the city, because it creates a lineage with the modern movement, with the Siam, and that we can question today, and that we'll see through that presentation that it has evolved. One other medium that actually helped to shape the understanding of urban design was, of course, the urban design conferences that through the curriculum we talked about generally, and there also like, so we had like a series of 12 conferences from 1956 to 1970 that actually helped to say where urban design could happen. And at the beginning, it goes back to this idea of the role of of urban design, role of the architect, of the planner, of the landscape architect within the built environment, the shape of the city. So those kind of things overlapping with the seminar, and after, like throughout the years, it goes more and more into something which are more specific into what the where urban design can apply with shopping more of a programmatic approach. One other aspect is actually, and the kind of pinnacle is the creation of the urban design program in 1960 that kind of combined all of this idea within like 3 different post-professional degrees, the one that we know today, and the Master of City Planning that was also part of the curriculum. And this also, like the ambition of this program originally was to actually like have designers which are capable of tackling the different challenges that the society could have. So again, like the approach is really to try to integrate different perspectives. And what we see, like in this document, we're talking about anthropology, planning, engineering, education, programming, so technology, law, landscape architecture, business management, and so to have this breadth. And also, like something which is interesting in this document is to say that there is a highlight again about like the number of international people that there is. And so this goes back again to this idea of an international practice, and where we can see the relevance also of traveling and having like a global point of view on this practice. And then like going back to further like I mean, well, later in time, in '86, we have like two additions to the urban design realm, which is like the creation of a prize, the Prince of Wales prize, to actually like recognize successful urban design project through the lens of the GSD again. So this helped to actually see how would the school consider urban design and how it would be like treated. And so we'll see actually like one project that was about that. And there is of course the fellowship itself, the creation of the Druker Fellowship, with again like this ambition to have people go outside, go see urban design, I mean like questioning the city. So all of this is basically just notes. There is also like this document that I think is interesting in the way that part of the archival work and archival research was to also try to see like again like what were the trends or how did the program actually evolved through time since the 60s until today, and to see that we have like a different cohort of people that are actually like been involved. And something which is key here and that comes again and again is again the diversity of point of view that those people can bring. Because if we just only take like the first cohort, the 7 faculty members that were involved in the urban programming early on, there is this international aspect. Also, like we can see that elements and the core studio evolved through time to actually try to gather like as many point of views as possible. So stepping aside like from the archival research, I thought it was a bit like distance for me, and so part of the fellowship I actually wanted to go and visit like people that were actually like involved in the faculty to understand like how the urbanism program was actually like shaped in the first like throughout time and how it evolved. So with that in mind, I could actually like meet with Moshe Safdie back in 2020, as Moshe was the director of the urban design program in 1978 to 84, at the same time that Ron was faculty here, and 10 years after Habitat was created, and with this idea of like challenging also like lifestyle that we can have, and discussing with him and with the different people that you'll see after, I could actually like try to grasp a little bit what were the ambition at that time. And the ambition for Moshe was to say, okay, it has to be design based, like we have to look at case studies. There is also like an ambition to be grounded into what's happening outside. So the development studio was created in order like to see how we can implement things. And there was again, like this idea of enhancing like the international approach of urban design and of the program. So to have the Jerusalem studio that was created at that time, and that also like brought together the different disciplines: architecture, landscape architecture, planning, and urban design, like within the same cohort. Continuing on the discussion series, I could also talk with Peter Rowe, and as we know, Peter have been here for 40 years, and this actually like gave me the opportunity to, through different roles, as director of the urban design program in the first place, as UPD chair, and then as dean and as professor, to have like an understanding of all the different phases that could happen, that have happened like for the 40 years, and through his time, and this all of this I'm talking under the control of the faculty here, all the experts. The ambition of Peter was to try to have the student basically rehearse what they were going to see outside in the real world, and so to have also like a point of view which will bring as many point of view as possible, and also like in terms of scale too. So this goes back also to this idea that urban design can happen like in many places. So to study the central city, the suburban, the peripheral. Then I could also talk with Felipe Correa, that was the director of the program when I was in school, and where there like the approach was quite different, where it was like more typological driven, looking at the city through its built form, and also like looking at the city, through a case study which was New York. So in there, like the ambition was really like just to try to enhance, like from the interviews I could get, to enhance the program relevance in order like for it to make sure that it would help to tackle also like again like the different questions that the city can ask, and to go back to the core studio as a series of exercises that we found already with Peter Rowe. And then the last discussion that I had last year was with Sarah, who arrived 6 months earlier as a dean, and the discussion that we had to me was really helpful. It was short but sweet, saying that basically like there was this idea of the UPD department actually as a microcosm, as you said, of basically how we could look at the city, and because like there is this idea of the aspiration of designing, but also the constraint of the design, which have to be integrated. And there was also like a great contribution like to this research was this idea of this broad subject, basically, with this idea of derive that you talked about as well, because like going to the more travel part of the project of the research, of the presentation, a bit messing around. The subject is quite broad, and to me at my scale the question was like, okay, urban design is super broad, like how can you tackle it, like how do you phrase it, like how do you frame it? And to me that's why like I've changed the name of the research to sampling urban design, in this idea that the ambition at the end of the day was to me to continue my education and to try to get my own point of view on that. And so this first part of the presentation is more about like the different ideas, thoughts, discussion that I could have with the different people that I've met. The second one will be really more about the project themselves. So when I reached out to people to discuss those ideas about urban design, like my idea was just to try to see what was the global community that the GSD has. And so I could meet with about like 25 people in an interview setting which come from practice, from academia, and that are related to the GSD. That was basically like the guidelines that I set myself to have to reach out to those people. And so they could be faculty, they could be like former students, but they had to be involved into the GSD with a urban mindset, I would say. And so this led me to actually visit the places, seeing like the different offices, and the ambition of those discussions was there was like several points. Like the first one was to basically have an overview of the program of urban design through their lens, to try to understand like also like what were their experience at the GSD. Also like trying to understand like what are their perspectives, and also try to build up some kind of lineage between like all of those people, like what are the overlaps that are coming together, in order to see that ideas are transferred, ideas are exported, and to see how this lies. Also like the point of meeting those people was also like to have the maximum breadth in terms of period, and also in terms of nationalities, to have like many point of views. And actually something that I think like was really interesting was to see that throughout the different discussion, which were like in a format of like 30, 60 or 90 minutes discussion, I could see that some references, some projects were coming back in the discussion. So you have the classic references, and to me like that was great also because I realized I don't know anything and I still need to learn a lot. And to me like that was also like a great aspect, and still like digging into that today. There is also like a question, and maybe like this is an open question as well, to say like, could we challenge those references? Like, what are the references today? How do we make sure that we are relevant? And I think like what I have seen through, I mean like discussing, is the fact that all of this discussion topics show that there are like many ways to tackle urban design in general, and that it was really helpful. So as this first I mean like the discussion part really helped me to actually like ask a lot of questions about urban design. Visiting the different projects also like helped me to ask myself a lot of questions about like what I would see and how to challenge that. So visiting those projects, I wanted to basically see if there were like some topics that I could bring forward, and what were the thoughts on all of them. So I'd like to start this series by the idea of like big architecture, or because like prior coming to the GSD, prior studying urban design, I thought naively that urban design was mainly about like this big architecture, like just a question of scale. And these trips actually allowed me to see like different examples of big architecture which have been produced either by faculty or by students, former students of the GSD, to see that it triggers like some question. And to me, like the first series of questions regarding big architecture is like, they are often monuments, they are often publicized globally, and to me there is like a contradiction between like what's being publicized and when you get there, like, is it public? Like basically, like, is it a place that you can actually go to, even though like it has a very popular, not popular, but like accessible image in a way. So I could see going to Beijing, where there is like a lot of architecture, I mean big architecture, which have some components of, I mean like urban components, that it could be questionable. Like in the case of CCTV, we also had it like in the, as a case study in the UD core program as an urban element. And so to me, there was like this aspect that, oh, it's publicized, so maybe it means that it's urban, that it's public, and that I can go. And well, I realize it's maybe obvious, but no, it's not that true. And I could find also that with this idea of like, does urban means public, was not true as well when we're talking about housing. And in housing question, like it's more obvious as well because like it's housing, so it necessarily being private. But to me, like what was interesting was to see that we have housing, but we still treat them like cities. We still bring like urban elements. Wow, okay, we still bring urban elements within those designs, and to me, it's when it's a building, it's a question which is like maybe easy to answer, but maybe when it's architecture which mimics more and more the city, the question is not that easy to answer. And in the case of the Interlace in Singapore, we have like a collection of courtyard. We have the street-like, I mean not street-like, but piazza-like campus. All of this that brings that takes from the question of the city that are involved in that and that you cannot really access to. So this kind of contradiction to me was interesting, and I could see also it. I could see it also like within other projects, like the Novartis campus in Shanghai, where same thing, like it's a project which is heavily publicized with architect architecture, with like great building, like an urban, like the plan is urban, but in the end, like what you see when you get there is fences. And to me, like there is again like this idea of publicness that goes back to this contradiction. And to me, like that, it's something that I was really interested in too. And that's why, so I try to also see at, okay, so what are those elements that makes the city and that we find in the idea of like the city that we know, that we study. So I could visit like 5 different projects, either in Europe or in Honda or in Singapore, that carry those different like urban elements. The first one was Borneo Sporenburg in Amsterdam, which actually so have been recognized by the Green Prize. So for its urban design quality, and in there we see that there are streets, there are courtyards, there are monuments, there are all of this. And this work, like in a European context, we can see like within this this massive neighborhood scale urban design project, that there is also like room for individuality, and that it's part also of the success of the project. One other project that I could visit is a development by Vittorio Lampugnani, a master plan by Vittorio Lampugnani, next to Zurich, where also like we have this idea of like bringing together like the street, like the courtyard, all of those elements that we know. And to me, like where I would like to go through that is really trying to understand within this idea of urban design as an international practice, also with the education that we have in the school, which also had this global point of view, to see like how do we make sure that we're relevant when we go to different places. And because we see that there are some elements that we see again and again, so the arcades, the piazza in here, that were translated in other projects that I could visit, which are, for example, like the Butaro Hospital by MS Design, where we also see the same elements, again, like arcades, that can be brought like from, that are brought basically in this geography. And to me, it was interesting to see that the project here is successful. I mean, there is not a lot of people in this picture, but like you can really feel an urban feeling. Wow. Urban feeling to that, and that maybe we can question. I will go a bit more quickly because we're on short of on time. But this idea, because in Butaro, like the project was really like set within also like a urban setting as well in a way. I mean, like there are also like other programmatic buildings around it, which was not the case of another project which was sitting just in front of it, which is like the UGHE, also in Butaro, which is like a university, and this one is actually like disconnected from the city fabric. And at that time, like the place was not fully open, but still, like there was again like those different elements of urban design, of urbanity that we find. And to me, it's really a question about how do we make sure that what we integrate in design is appropriate. So another question, I mean another subject, project was the Oasis Terrace in Singapore, where at the scale of a building we also have those different urban elements which are brought to the table. And to me here what was interesting is the fact that the project is successful as it is also like connected to the city and acts as a kind of I mean, the only urban device with urban elements like within this this fabric. Just go quickly. I have like 15 slides still. And so then what I could see while traveling also was the idea of like preservation that I would like to touch upon, because like all of the projects that you've seen before are actually like projects which are brand new, but going to China, going to Shanghai, to Beijing also like helped me to have like try to see also a little bit like how we can tackle preservation and the like in a city that, for example, like I don't know, with a very precise, methodology or integration. So, for example, like I could talk with Yango Chang while being in Beijing, where he was telling me about the fact that coming to the US for him was not expected like to a city to be, and I couldn't understand that while visiting Beijing, his hometown, and to see that how can we make sure that the city that we know, that we care about, is preserved. And I could see like different interventions which are like really specific, acupunctural, to maintain basically like to maintain the fabric. Those questions about like basically like bringing together, I mean like opening, making accessible the different projects is also like a subject that I would like to touch upon. In projects like in Singapore, where there is also like this idea of having projects which demonstrate different ideas toward urban design, toward like utopias like of cities, to make sure like how do we preserve them, how do we maintain the idea of what could be the city, and to me, like some of the projects became enclaves, some other projects were still very connected to the city, and to me it's a lesson that we have to just like make sure that that those projects remain accessible in order to remain to keep their urban character, and to basically still be relevant and preserved. And I could see like different projects like that throughout in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, where there is this idea of like having like small interventions that helps to those projects to carry through. So same thing like happening, I will go quicker, with the idea of like the waterfront, which is also part of this kind of preserving the city, making it like more enjoyable, while looking at taking again like the different lenses of I mean the urban, the landscape, the architecture as well, and bringing them together. So one aspect that I thought was interesting throughout also like visiting those different projects and bringing it back to a different discussion was the fact that in the end, like it's really important like just to look at the city, to look at what's been built, because everything is a result of like decisions. to see that there are some overlaps between like the different discussions that we can have. And to me, like this building, like at the NUS, I mean the University of Singapore, like Chrisley is also an example of that. Like there is this idea of like bringing together like the climatic landscape aspect of a building while making it also like building which is like specific to its context. And to me, like going back to the context, what's important, okay, what's important to the what was important, like in part of the research, was to say that now we have to basically like go beyond this idea of just like looking at the form of the city itself, but to see also like what's the different impact that we can have in terms of like social impact, in terms of the broader context, in order to make sure that we have to be relevant. And this example, like I wish I could visit some project by Xu Tiantian. We had a discussion with the Sangha story as well, where we have this idea of a story, of urban story of different urban projects, which are really created, which are like happening like in a very specific manner. And I think that it's maybe a good way to look at it, and to back up on that, like there is this idea also of everyday urbanism that I could discuss when I was meeting with Margaret Crawford in Berkeley, where the question asked there is like, how basically can urban design help us to make things better? Like how can we, what are the things that needs to be better to be in order to be enhanced? So I stop there. I know I'm really over time. Sorry about that. I'm just going to conclude the presentation by saying that basically, so this process, like the being part of the fellowship, to me, like was really part of an ongoing education. To me, like I could see, like while visiting those different projects, that there are like many ways through which we can actually like look at urban design. It's been also like just like a teaching lesson continuously to actually like listen to the different people that I could discuss with. And this idea of that actually, so through those discussions, through visiting all of the project, that the practice of urban design actually like evolves completely, that it's not like a kind of case study approach, which is like very, we try to repeat basically like different concepts and apply them in different geographies, but it's more actually like in the end a possibility to be way more specific, and that for that actually the school is really still like influent as it really uses in the end like urban design as a way, as a tool just to question the city and to see like that it can have like many lenses to look at. Sorry for the hectic end of this presentation, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the effort of compiling all this experience in a short period of time. Yeah, probably because we have a reception immediately after. I would suggest that we do just some questions and answer now, like 10 minutes. But later you are going to have the chance to speak to them when we have the reception outdoor, in a way. That then if you have any question, I think in general it seems to me that you took a very good advantage of the fellowship in terms that you were using your first project after the GSD. Is the way I can see that we can share or not these elements, but you were making your personal soul on it. And I think that is very much, I appreciate it very much. Thank you for that. I'm open, if you have questions, I mean, please feel free, because I think for us it's going to be very important now to get the feedback from them. Yeah, please.
I'll ask a quick question.
No, there is a student behind you, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Rahul.
Yeah. Oh, Sorry, you want to ask? Oh,
Yeah. You were going to be the second, sorry.
Thank you. I have a quick question regarding is this presentation you imagined in the first place when you come up with this topic, or it's like through the travel it gradually developed and come to this stage? Could you share that experience with us? Thank you.
I can start. To me, so it was really like a learning process also along the way about like what I was hoping to find and what I actually found. And it's also like going back to the breadth and the breadth of my subject was really like too broad in the end. And at the beginning, I felt a bit like overwhelmed about it. And the attitude that I had was really to try to see like how do I make sure that in the end I can tailor the research and have things which are that I can actually grasp myself at my scale. And in the end also like another aspect about the expectations to visit different projects, to go to meet different people was sometimes like not, sometimes like some projects were actually like inaccessible. I couldn't get access to it, and I think it's also like part of the research itself and all of the questions that I could raise that helped me to get this.
No. I think like from the very first slides that I put in place, I think there is probably none of them left. So it is a process that you put the slides in an order, and then you kind of setting up the whole presentation completely differently, and new things come in mind, and then you change your view, and you try maybe to because there is this this thing that you have 30 minutes. Although we didn't really keep that, yeah. But you have very limited time, and you kind of try to give a very full sense of each project within a few minutes. So I don't think that, for me at least, I don't think when I started really traveling and doing my research, I had a general frame for my research that even this changed later, but I don't think you think about the presentation at that time. At least I wasn't thinking about the presentation. I was thinking the material I have to find, and if what I find makes sense and connects kind of the dots to at the end present the problem, the solution, or anything of its case. So the presentation, I think I changed it yesterday. So it really is it's the easiest outcome, I would say. The most difficult is to find the framework.
Thank you, Marius. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry about that. No, my question sort of is situated in Ron's comment or observation that, of course, over these 3-4 decades, the fellowship and the idea of travel and what you can get from it also has changed. I see many students here who are eagerly watching because I think a lot of them are going to apply for this fellowship, right? And I think in both your cases it's quite different, Maxine. Of course, you travel to meet people. That was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. The world has changed. Of course, Zoom doesn't give you the same chemistries, but people will do that kind of research using technologies. And then you went and visited buildings and made some connections. So we saw the travel component in some ways. Marius, just to be honest, and of course I know you traveled and used the funds, so I don't mean to put you on a thing, but I just would like to know, because it was a long view, a macro view of things. And for both of you, what were the moments, what was the value the actual travel brought as you were formulating the research? What are those moments which you now feel you could have never done if you weren't on the ground and had traveled through the long, big view on the internet or whatever?
It's true that my topic, I think one of the things with my topic was that it was very difficult to have many photos, because all these facilities have so much security, and you're never really allowed to go very close to these places. So what I decided at some point is to just go on these places, visit the archives, planning office, and all. So the traveling comes from going to that place, to each place, trying to find information, speak with people, and if you are lucky enough, probably you have more photos. But in my case, I think the photo was the least possible evidence of traveling. But I think it has its own kind of magic to go to all these public planning offices, try to find the material, and also the disappointment that nobody's replying your emails and doesn't really provide any kind of help. But I guess it's part of the process.
Yeah, thank you.
And on my side, I would say that actually, even though we could do them on Zoom today, having the different discussion with the different people was actually for me the most uplifting, because there was a lot of frustration, maybe going to a project and not being able to see it. But on the side, to actually have access to, practitioner academics was great, because it gave me access to a knowledge that I didn't know, and that was just served like that. And everyone has been extremely generous with that.
Thank you very much. I think we take the last question and then we will continue. Please.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm quite curious about the future of these research projects. Do you see them sort of expanding beyond the limits of the GSD into a much larger research where you sort of narrow down on a specific topic with regards to urban design or logistics? And if so, how do you see that expanding?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. Yeah, please.
I haven't thought about it, to be honest, but...
you still have plenty of time. You're very
You have plenty of time, probably, but, one of the things, and I think that's an advice, at least from my side, for the students that they really want to apply for the fellowship, is that this fellowship, probably you end up with the GSD, you receive the fellowship, and then you kind of have to organize things, how they're gonna work. Are you gonna stop working, devote yourself on this fellowship for a year, and then go back to work? And it is very important, because for me, probably I did it completely wrong, because I traveled for some time, and then I had to do. I did a bit of research, but then I had to do everything else on my evening time after my normal job, and this works for a few months, but not for a few years. And it's if I would do it now, I would definitely stop working, take a year off, do everything, my research, most of my presentation at least, and then go back to business. But so in this sense, I don't know what's the future of this thing, because whatever the future it is, it's gonna require a lot of work, and I don't know, maybe I will take a year off and do something.
I think that could be a good advice to them. No, I think it's good, your experience.
It's very important,
that, yeah?
because I think what we don't really think at the moment we apply for this fellowship is that we're gonna have 3 or 4 years ahead of us to work on that, and during this time, a lot of things change. People make families, change jobs, change cities, and.
Well, thank you.
Really
I think it's very honest and very clear. And probably they can borrow this experience. Maxime? Yes.
And to me, I would love to actually have something that is, that collects all of those thoughts, all of those ideas, because right now it's actually this research was actually pretty hard to just put into a presentation, because it gathered so many thoughts that it cannot be just interviews that you're just going to project on the screen, and that's why also I had a hard time to at the end to collate it. But I would especially because it resonates also with what you were saying at the beginning, Rahul, that there is this knowledge which is gathered like at the GSD, but also outside of the GSD, and that there is actually like all of this community of people like practicing, but also like, like spreading basically like the influence of the GSD outside. And to me, I could only grasp just like, 20 people, 25 people through my lens, and to that I would love to be able to continue it actually.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, please.
That's okay. I can't tell you how proud and pleased I am to have Marius and Max do what they've done, and to understand that to appreciate how much work went into it, and the travel, as you know, is not so easy. And it's become more difficult, and it's not all glory. Because I was going to ask them, tell me about the flights that got canceled. Tell me about the problem you had renting a car and all of that. But the fact is that this is a lot of work, and thank you very much, because it validates what we talked about in 1986. So anybody out there who's going to apply, you got to work at it. But thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.